Hello, this is Michael Novenson with Information Security Media Group. We're going to be discussing top AI attacks and how ITDR can prevent them. We'll be exploring this with Alex Weinert. He is the Chief Product Officer at Semperis. While AI can significantly improve your organization's workflow, it can also introduce new threats in the wrong hands. In today's webinar, we'll discuss how AI is enabling attackers at increased rates and efficiency, putting your core business systems at risk. We'll discuss effective identity threat detection and response strategies that can help reduce these attack impacts. We'll discuss the top ways AI is enabling attackers, how an effective ITDR strategy can help reduce attack impacts, as well as how to uncomplicate the task of securing your business systems in the face of AI. A little bit of information about us here at Information Security Media Group. We started 19 years ago, back in 2006, as a single property covering the banking and financial services industry. Since that time, we've expanded and today encompass 38 global media sites. This includes topic-based coverage in areas like banking and financial services, healthcare, and government, coverage around data breaches and information risk, and more recently, we've branched out to cover artificial intelligence, the chief information officer community, and operational technology. We host summits all around the world and roundtables, as well as the webinar you're listening to today. If you do need any technical support during today's webinar, please reach out to webinars@ismg.io. Today's webinar is being brought to you by Semperis, a cybersecurity leader and an Active Directory expert. They know that identity-first security is the key to operational resilience. For more than 90% of today's enterprise organizations, if Active Directory isn't secure, nothing is. Many of the world's leading businesses trust Semperis to help them protect Active Directory and Azure Active Directory from escalating cyber threats. Nothing is off limits to today's cyber attackers, including emergency services, hospitals and healthcare providers, schools, and financial institutions. Whether your business is building businesses, saving lives, or serving citizens, Semperis helps people operate with confidence by protecting their critical identity infrastructure. Our subject matter expert for today's webinar is Alex Weinert, Chief Product Officer. Most recently, he was Vice President of Identity Security at Microsoft. He led the team that delivered core defense technologies that form the cornerstone of Microsoft's Zero Trust offerings: Entra Identity Protection, Entra Conditional Access, Multi-Factor Authentication, and the Microsoft Authenticator app, as well as a host of enterprise and consumer account defense systems. Prior to his current role, Alex previously served in a variety of engineering and product management roles on products such as MSN, Visual Studio, Xbox, and identity-related products like Active Directory and FIM. Outside of work, Alex is passionate about interacting with various humans, making stuff, sailing, and music. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hey, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the intro. Appreciate being here.
You're very welcome. So let me start you off with a big picture question here, and that is, what are today's top AI-powered attacks?
Well, I think that the main thing that we think about in modern AI is generative AI and its ability to emulate humans and synthesize content pretty rapidly. And so I think that yields one class of attack, which is that you can spearfish at a level that we've never seen before. You know, the accuracy, for example, if somebody gets hold of one mailbox, they can very quickly have generative AI synthesize a spearphishing email that looks exactly like it comes from the right organization. It is formatted correctly. It has topics that make sense. So you're literally talking about getting an email from your boss that says, hey, review this document now, but the document payload can be malware, right? So it's really, really hard to discern. It's already very hard for humans to discern attacks. I think with generative, we can see that going to, basically non-discernible. And so that's one class that I think people are thinking about. And what that means is that if you have any vectors into your estate in terms of core systems for administration, including your directory systems, your identity systems, then the likelihood of those accounts standing up to a phishing attack is very, very low, right? So it means that we have to kind of double down on making sure that we have least standing access, right? It also means we need to double down on making sure that the credentials that we're using are non-phishable. So using things like passkey instead of passwords, or even password plus telephone. But the other major attack that's really interesting is that we're in a place where discovery is much, much easier. And in some ways, it's like, hey, this is what we paid for, right? Like we want generative AI tools to help us go through and be able to ask a question. So if you think about, 20 years ago, you had all these files around in your environment, and the only way you could find them is you knew they were there, right? There was no search, there was no indexing, right? Like, it's just very, very hard to find content. Even today, like very often it's hard to find the content you're looking for. Because with index search, which is kind of the next generation, with index search, you can sort of say, well, I'm looking for documents about this topic, but if those exact words weren't used, or if that exact, author wasn't in the title or whatever, you might not get the hit. And also the currency of the document might be in question, or is it really related? With generative, we can start to ask questions like, for example, summarize all current cyber threats in my environment per documents written in the last 6 months. Right? That's a very scary query for somebody to be able to issue into an environment that's been indexed with generative. And so the impetus on us to make sure that environment is truly secure, that we understand the attack paths, that we've cut off the vectors that people can use, is higher. Because if any account, it's always been somewhat true that if any one account falls, then that's a jumping off point that an attacker can use to conquer an environment. But in the world of generative AI, acquiring that account using spear phishing is easier than ever, right? And then the speed with which you can utilize that account, if you're using generative AI search tools, is also very, very high. So it just increases the burden to some extent. The good news is we can use generative AI as well to help address those problems.
Very interesting. And want to get a sense from you of what impact do they have as compared to traditional attacks?
Well, so I think it's sort of, again, the before and after is useful to think about. So once upon a time, we had passwords, and I spent a fair amount of my career trying to convince people to use MFA or to use passkeys, to use really strong MFA. Um, and in a world where people have used MFA, the attacker's burden is now to trick you into performing that MFA task to give them access, right? And very often the way that you do that is with phishing, right? So I'm going to try to convince you to interact with me. And the trick to that is with conventional phishing, I might say something like just, hey, we're doing a prize handout. Come click this link, right? And then I trick you into giving away the password. Now with MFA, the password isn't sufficient for repeated sessions, so I have to trick you into doing an adversary in the middle phishing attack. And the burden on the attacker goes up higher. And the opportunities for the person who's being attacked are better for them to detect that that's an attack and to resist it, right? We have things like the frame around your browser that warn you that you're going to the wrong site, that sort of thing. We get more opportunities in those situations to resist attacks. But it boils down to the question of, can you convince the person that you're interacting with to do the thing that they've been trained not to do? Like you've been trained not to put your credentials into a strange website. You've been trained not to click on links from emails from senders you don't recognize. In the world of generative, I can synthesize an email that is in fact indiscernible. It will look exactly like the mail you're expecting to get from your boss or your colleague, right? And so that becomes a burden where we can't really expect a user to be able to resist a phishing attack. The only real answer in that world is phishing resistant credentials, things like passkeys or FIDO2, right? So that's kind of the big elevation in terms of conquering accounts. And then the second big elevation is the one I mentioned, which is where the ability of an attacker to move through an environment and acquire information, if that environment has been empowered for generative AI tools. If there's an agent, if I take over an account and the account has access to a search agent, and I can simply tell the search agent, find me all information of this type, and it will actually go and search across those documents and summarize it into a tidy package for me and let me walk away with it. If the thing I'm asking for is, for example, quickly summarize for me all of the credentials that are in documents or files in this environment, right? Suddenly I have a nice index of all of the applications that are running in the environment that have credentials in them. So that's a much faster and much more powerful attack. The recon phase, the part where the attacker has to go and find things, gets condensed down into, one query, right? And they get a summary that they can walk away with. They don't even have to stay in the environment. They can come back later with that information.
Very interesting. Wanted to get a sense from you of where are enterprises challenged to detect and to respond to AI powered attacks?
Well, I think that there are, we can think about these distinct phases, right? Prevention being one of them. So prevention, I've mentioned it, which is, it is really essential that, so for example, Semperis has a tool called Purple Night, which detects known vulnerabilities in the environment. We have another tool called Forest Druid. Forest Druid, you can think of it as figuring out attack graphs, like not just here are the people who have access to Active Directory, but here are the people who have access to the people who have access to Active Directory, right? So for example, I'm the administrator of a distributed group, and that group is used to populate my administrator's group. I can now explore that using Forest Druid. I can understand those pathways. By using those pathways and understanding where all the attacks can come from, you can begin to then cut off the unnecessary access, right? So that's a very key thing to do. In a world where anyone who has access, that access can be exploited faster than ever, it's very important that we minimize standing access, that we really think in terms of what is our solution for having the least standing privilege possible and for controlling unnecessary access into this environment. And we're particularly concerned with the identity infrastructure, because once that identity infrastructure collapses, it's kind of game over. We'd say it's an extinction event in some cases. For some organizations can't survive it. So it's very, very important that we're protecting that space, and understanding the attack paths into that space and cutting them off is super critical. That's probably the most important thing, is reducing the surface area for attackers. The second thing is being very thoughtful about really what are the permissions in your environment. You could be in the old days when the only way you found a document was knowing the name of the document and exactly where it was. You could be kind of lazy about permissions, but today you can't be lazy about permissions. The agents are going to find and index those documents. So the way that you prevent those documents from being exposed to an attacker is you make sure the documents only are exposed to the people they should be. So understanding document permissioning is the second really, really important thing. And then third is detecting any anomalous behavior. So like if people start doing weird things in the environment, right? Being able to go through and say, okay, I see that, Michael is making changes to our group policy, and like he's never done that before, right? That detecting those anomalies becomes really, really important if the attack does get past you in terms of attack surface reduction, then detection becomes really key, and then containment.
So let's get into where are the gaps in traditional identity threat detection and response strategies.
Well, I think that frankly, a lot of traditional identity security is pretty general. Like it's this idea of sort of I'm going to be looking at every account that gets compromised. And while that is a nice ideal, most organizations that I've worked with over the years are investigating, between 5 and 10% of detected attacks, right? And the reason for that is that their investigation teams are overwhelmed, right? Their SOC teams are they get much, much more data than they can process. And so they can only selectively investigate the most critical cases. Understanding which of the accounts can get access into that central environment, minimizing that number, really goes a long way towards being able to focus those investigations and making sure that that you're focused on the infrastructure piece of this equation. The person who is like I don't want to downplay the importance of losing business information, right? So if you think about sort of, my admin gets compromised and can see this quarter's financials, that's very, very bad. Like we should understand it's bad, but it's nothing compared to my identity infrastructure is compromised and the attacker can now get access to any system they want to at will, right? That's a very different level of attack and level of severity. So I think that one of the main things for effective ITDR is focus. And I don't think that we're at a place where all the solutions are helping focus customers. So I think that really understanding and focusing on the infrastructure components of this is super key. ITDR is not generalized identity security, right? It's specific to protecting the infrastructure. So going through and really understanding the complete solution, I think there are approaches which are frankly too focused into one element. So, for example, there are approaches which are wholly focused on prevention, right? With the assumption that we'll never actually have a successful attack. There's other approaches that are wholly focused on attack surface reduction, right? The idea that, again, we can block it. But really thinking about the entire circuit, the evaluation and posture improvement is key, and needs to integrate with detection and disruption, and needs to integrate with preparation and response, right? And all those things have to work together. One thing that I think uh, is essential in this world is that we're really helping people understand that complete circuit, the before, during, and after an attack, and empowering them to respond appropriately in each of those cases, including when you think about it, if your identity infrastructure is down, you have no application access. So if you're planning to contact your security team by email or Teams, you're kind of out of luck, right? You can't sign into Zoom because you don't have identity. You can't get to the documents that guide you through recovery because you don't have identity. So all of those things end up being inhibitors for a successful recovery. And I think that's another thing that a lot of ITDR solutions don't quite get right, which is that in an ITDR event, there is no identity. You need a completely alternate tool set.
Absolutely. And what do you consider to be the hallmarks of an effective ITDR strategy?
I think the effective ITDR strategy is going to be very largely centered um, in these three chapters, right? In I think posture assessment and improvement is very, very key. I think that detection and disruption is key, and then I think preparation and response is key. But of all those things, what I think is actually probably most critical and least done is rehearsal, right? And so I'd say this is like having a fire extinguisher in your kitchen, and you kind of, you should, because you could have a fire, so you buy it and you throw it in the corner, and uh, and then you never do anything with it. Well, if a fire breaks out, do you know how to operate it? Do you know where it is? Can you get to it in time? Does it still work? And very often, we're in a situation where, unfortunately, with identity outages, which are much, much more extreme, uh, people aren't doing any rehearsals or preparation in that way.
And how is Semperis helping customers tackle these challenges?
Well, Semperis is, after 30 years at Microsoft and about 15 leading identity security at Microsoft, um, I was in an interesting position. And in talking to Semperis and working with Semperis over the years, I'd realized that this was an organization that was very, very mission focused, and very focused on helping customers with this critical problem. And not in a way that was, okay, we're just doing detections or we're just doing backup, or we're just doing it, for one environment or the other, but actually really looking at what's the whole problem for the customer that we're trying to solve. And so I think where Semperis came from historically was in this Active Directory resilience space. But as it grew through that space, what happened was that when organizations had resilience events, and these could be malware events, they could be other kinds of outages around Active Directory or around identity systems, it's kind of the worst day of your life, right? Like you can't communicate, you can't, you can't do any business at all. Like if you're a hospital, you're not doing medical care. If you're a bank, you're not doing transactions. Customers are freaking out. The board is freaking out. And so what happened was Semper started to do um, services as well, right? Just like stepping in with all the expertise. Semper has a ridiculous amount of identity expertise, and would step in with that expertise, whether or not the organization was a customer yet, and help them recover from these events, right? And by doing this over and over and over again, I think that Semperis was uniquely able to see this bigger picture, right? By having that servicing component, was able to see this bigger picture of all the things that need to happen. And in fact, that's kind of what created Ready One, right? So Ready One is a Semperis solution for crisis management that operates completely independent of conventional infrastructure. right? And the reason for that is that, again, if you're having that outage, how do you contact your team? And Ready One gives that solution. And it's it's a very cool solution. You should check it out. But I think it's better as just an example. It's an example of seeing the whole problem and then bringing tools to the table that solve the whole problem. The whole problem isn't solved by saying, well, the SOC's got to detect all my identity events and stop them. Or, I'm going to have somehow created a perfect environment that can't be attacked, right? That's not realistic. Realistic is you're going to have to work every angle of this problem. You have to think before, during, and after the attack with the tools that are designed to take you through that process, right? And I think that's where Semperis is unique, is that Semperis doesn't solve identity as a part of some other thing. Semperis is identity focused and is focused on solving this entirety of this identity resilience and security problem.
What are the questions that our viewers should be asking about their own current capabilities?
I think there's a couple of things that are really key. I think probably the most important thing I would ask is uh, if you are rehearsing realistically. Right. I think that's really essential for organizations to do, is to go through and actually make sure that, again, this isn't the fire extinguisher that's been left in the corner of the kitchen, and forgotten, but the tools are actually being exercised. I would I would ask, um, I would ask about, how this operates in real life with your real team and your real processes, right? And I think that getting your playbooks together and being able to execute those playbooks and run tabletops is super, super key with whatever tool set you're using. Um, I think that, thinking through the reality that identity attacks don't begin and end with, like a data loss. Like a lot of attacks, when you think about ransomware, it's like, well, they've encrypted my data. Identity, it's not like you can just take a backup of the server and restore it, because the accounts that are in that identity system may be corrupted. The policies that are in there may be corrupted by the attacker. The group memberships that are in there may be impacted by the attacker. And then the server that it's running on may have malware on it, right? So you have, one of the things that's sort of unique about our solution is this ability to isolate the data from the execution environment. So you could take literally any server, footprint that's clean, and then actually replay your identity stack onto that so that you have a guaranteed malware-free environment. But that's not enough, because the attacker got into your environment somehow, right? So what were the known vulns that existed in the environment? And that gets us into this concept of recovery without security isn't meaningful. Again, you have to solve the whole problem. And so in this world, I think you want to think in terms of, okay, I'm doing recovery into my clean room environment, but now I need to assess my known vulns so the attacker doesn't re-enter. I also need to assess known attack pathways, right? So that I'm not giving them too much permission again. And I need to be able to review the history of what's happened in the environment so that I can see what footsteps the attacker took, and be able to roll back to the changes that they made, right? That ability to do all of that is essential to getting a clean restoration. It's not like you can just say, well, Active Directory is on their server, I'm going to restore that server from a previous image. Because you're just going to restore the malware, the vulnerabilities, the attack paths that the attacker used. So identity is a little bit unique in that the data is the pathway, right? So understanding that the data is clean, the environment is clean, that you have a safe environment to restore into is super key. And I think that's where the customer should focus, and then rehearse, rehearse, rehearse.
Finally, here, where can our viewers go to learn more?
Um, I'd encourage viewers to go to our website, to semperis.com, and there you'll find a host of information about both the conventional tools for backup and recovery, as well as our security tools, and then importantly, I think the execution environment, which is Ready One, which will allow you to restore an environment even when all systems are down.
Thank you for that, and thank you so much for the time today, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. We've been speaking with Alex Weinert, Chief Product Officer at Semperis, about top AI attacks and how ITDR can prevent them. For viewers out there, if you have any questions for Alex or the Semperis team, please reach out to webinars at ismg.io. For Information Security Media Group, this is Michael Novenson.